It was a hot summer day in Henderson, Kentucky on August 26, 1995. 23-year-old Heather Teague went to an isolated area on Newburgh Beach on the Ohio River to sunbathe and perhaps have some time alone. Her peaceful tranquility was shattered when a bearded man crept from the woods and grabbed Heather by her hair. He dragged the 23-year-old away from the beach, where the forest seemed to swallow her whole. Heather Teague was never seen again.
Welcome to Bitter Endings, a true crime podcast. I'm your host, J.R. Erickson. In Bitter Endings, I'll bring you stories of those taken too soon, the silent many who no longer have a voice through which to seek justice.
This week's episode of the Bitter Endings podcast is sponsored by my latest novel, Dark River Inn, which launched this week on Amazon.com. Dark River Inn is a paranormal murder mystery that is inspired by the true crime episode that I'm covering today. And although it is inspired by Heather Teague's case, it is very much a fictional novel. Dark River Inn is the first novel in a series of standalone paranormal murder mysteries inspired by true crimes. They are available in ebook, paperback, and eventually in audiobook on Amazon.com. I don't really have any personal updates this week other than that, as I said in the sponsored area a moment ago, that Dark River Inn launched this week. So I have been busy the last couple of weeks getting that book ready to launch, and now I am coming into a somewhat peaceful period of time where I am not quite as busy as I am when I'm nearing a book launch. Heather Danielle Teague was born April 25, 1972, to mother Sarah and father Paul Teague. She was the oldest of 4 children. I don't have a lot of additional information about Heather's siblings, nor her father, though when Heather disappeared in 1995, Heather's parents were divorced, and I believe that her father had been out of the picture for some time. Heather was an accomplished young woman. She was named runner-up in the Webster County Junior Miss Pageant in 1989. She attended Western Kentucky University from the fall of 1990 through the spring of 1993, majoring in pre-medicine originally and later changing her major to chemistry with a minor in biology. She had an academic scholarship, and she might have finished her degree, except Heather had lost some of her lust for life in 1993 and decided to drop out of school. Her mother, Sarah, would later say that Heather had become disillusioned with both life and people, choosing to leave school and move back in with her mother. Heather started working as a quality control auditor at AeroQuip in Henderson, Kentucky. She also taught aerobics classes. Sarah described Heather as a perfectionist. Heather was also a beauty, standing just 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 90 pounds. Heather had long, dark curly hair and bright green eyes. She was homecoming queen in high school and a cheerleader. Heather loved the sun, its warmth. She loved nature. And though life hadn't been perfect, in 1995 she seemed to be getting back on track. I did hear in another podcast that Heather may have gotten involved with drugs at some point, though I didn't really come across much about this in the news articles that I read, and I don't think it was a major aspect of her life. And as I've talked about in many podcasts, the recreational use of drugs is pretty common in most young people's lives at some point. So let's rewind back the clock to that sunny Saturday on August 26th, 1995. More than 25 years gone by. Heather drove to Newburgh Beach on the Ohio River in Henderson, Kentucky. She parked on private property and walked through the woods to a small patch of isolated beach where she set out her lounge chair. She wore shorts and a tank top over top of a bikini. She removed her clothing as well as her bikini top and laid on her stomach to tan her back. Though Heather was alone in this space, the area was not empty. People were driving ATVs just down the beach from where Heather lay, though I believe the woods and the sand dunes on either side of her concealed her. Either way, this area of Newburgh Beach where Heather was at was a relatively common hangout for people local to the area. Unbeknownst to Heather, a man on the opposite side of the river had spotted her through a pair of binoculars. He was staying in a riverfront home with his wife, and I'm unclear if he owned this house or was renting it. As he watched Heather sunbathe, he noticed movement in the woods behind her. The man shifted from binoculars to a high-powered telescope to get a better view of the events unfolding. He realized a man was approaching Heather through the woods, pausing and ducking down as if he were sneaking up on her. To the man's horror, he watched through the telescope as the stranger in the woods burst onto the beach and moved swiftly to Heather's chair. The man appeared to be bearded. He was brandishing a silver handgun, and he was possibly wearing a wig or a hat. The man grabbed a handful of Heather's hair and jerked her out of her chair. He pulled her into the woods, and the two disappeared. The man who witnessed the abduction, his name was Tim, was dumbfounded. Could it have been a prank? Perhaps the two knew each other, and the bearded man was a friend of the sunbathing woman's. The witness waited, continuing to watch the beach, hoping the girl would re-emerge. She didn't. Finally, the witness phoned the police. Now, the details here get a little wonky. It's unclear if the man picked up the phone and dialed 911, or if he called state police in Kentucky or possibly in Indiana, which is where he was at, again located across the Ohio River. Eventually, the Kentucky State Police were notified, and investigators went to Newburgh Beach. Police would find a towel, Teague's notebook, candy, $7 in cash, and part of her swimsuit. Her bare footprints appeared leading toward the woods and then vanished, as if her abductor had picked her up and carried her. But they didn't find Heather or her abductor, though it was clear from the scene that some kind of a struggle had occurred. Heather's car was parked in the same place on the private property near the woods she'd parked it before she went to the beach. Detective Lieutenant David Osborne of the Kentucky State Police Henderson Post was the first officer on the beach the day Heather vanished. In an article years later, he would say that the case stayed with him, and he thought of it almost daily. Heather's mom, Sarah, was notified, and she rushed to the scene. She would later describe how sick she felt when she saw Heather's chair empty and abandoned on the desolate area of beach. In addition to police, dozens of volunteers, some on horseback, scoured the beach and woods near Heather was taken. They searched riverbeds. A helicopter did an infrared search from the sky. Dogs were released to try and track Heather's scent, but they were unable to locate Heather. Just days after Heather's disappearance, a suspect emerged in her case, thanks in part to video surveillance that was being conducted near the woods at Newburgh Beach on the day she was taken. A farmer who was frustrated by vandalism to his crops had hired a company to videotape the area in an attempt to find the vandals. Basically, he owned property in that area, and beachgoers and other people who came to use the woods and the riverbank would drive over the crops. That is how I understood the point of this video. This video captured Heather's car parking on the private property near Newburgh Beach. The surveillance also captured a red and white Ford Bronco. A tipster also called Henderson police and gave the name Marvin Dill, who went by Marty. Dill owned a red and white Ford Bronco and he lived in the area. He was also a former convict. When police arrived at Marty's home on John Steele Road in the southern part of Henderson County with a search warrant regarding Heather Teague, Dill killed himself before they could speak to him. This occurred at 1:30 a.m. on September 2nd, less than a week after Heather had been taken. Other evidence would point to Marty. His Bronco was parked in dense brush as if to conceal it. The vehicle had also recently been washed. Statements would emerge from Dill's neighbors reporting the sounds of a woman's screams in the hours after Heather had vanished. There were also apparently reports by some of Dill's own friends and family wondering if he might be involved in Heather's disappearance. Dill, a 30-year-old carpenter, lived in Poole, Kentucky with his wife and young son. He also had a criminal record. Dill had previously been arrested in Evansville, Kentucky, driving around in his Bronco and soliciting young girls for sex. When police arrested him, they discovered 2 loaded handguns, marijuana, rubber gloves, duct tape, and rope in his vehicle. He was also on probation at the time of his suicide for a felony conviction for growing marijuana. He'd served less than 2 months in jail for his crimes. Initially, it seemed apparent that Dill had abducted and likely murdered Heather. Even the eyewitness, Tim, who saw the abduction across the river, identified Dill based on a driver's license photo as the man he'd seen kidnap Heather. But an obvious problem soon arose. At the time of Heather's abduction, Marty Dill did not have shaggy hair and a beard, the way he appeared in his dated driver's license photo, which apparently was like 10 years old. At the time of Heather's abduction, Marty was bald and clean-shaven for months, according to family and friends, and even his most recent jail record, which was just months before the abduction, it showed that Marty was bald. There was also no conclusive evidence linking him to Heather. A hair found in his Bronco appeared to be consistent with Heather's hair, but no specific testing was ever done to officially say that it did belong to Heather. 2 blood spots were also found on the Bronco. One proved not to be Heather's, and the other tested as inconclusive. Again, the Bronco had recently been cleaned before police arrived at Dill's home. So if there was evidence in the vehicle, he may have gotten rid of it or destroyed it. As far as I can tell, police did not find any evidence in Dill's home or on his property proving that Heather had been there, and they obviously did not find her body. Heather's mother, Sarah, was haunted by the disappearance of her daughter. She couldn't help but imagine the horrors her daughter had endured that day, and she wished so much that things had gone differently, that someone at the beach would have seen something and stopped it. Prosecutors gathered evidence against Dill and took the information before a grand jury. Much to the frustration of Sarah Teague and investigators, Marvin Dill's wife, Tracy, pled the Fifth Amendment and refused to answer any questions asked of her in front of the grand jury. Ultimately, Dill was not conclusively named as the man who abducted and murdered Heather. However, Kentucky State Police, according to Sarah, did tell her that Dill was the man who murdered Heather. They just couldn't prove it in a court of law. Despite making this claim, Heather's case remained unsolved and open, and Sarah Teague fought hard for justice for her daughter. She wrote countless letters and pleaded with authorities and even politicians in an attempt to get traction on Heather's case. She was furious that Marvin Dill's widow had been allowed to plead the Fifth Amendment in regard to Heather. Sarah called Tracy Dill and wrote so many letters to the woman that eventually Tracy brought charges of harassment against Sarah Teague. In 1996, Sarah was acquitted of the charges alleging she'd been harassing Marvin Dill's former wife. In a 1999 article in the Advocate Messenger, Sarah Teague said, "Not a day goes by that I don't think about what happened to Heather. I see it in my mind over and over again. I have heard she was buried in concrete, fed to hogs, was accidentally run over trying to escape from a car. Everything. The most horrible thing is that I know someone knows exactly what happened to her and where she is right now. How can they keep this from a mother? I just don't understand." In the same article, Sarah stated, quote, "I just want to know what happened to my little girl. A mother whose child dies in a car accident, while tragic in time, their pain may ease because you know where your child is. Not knowing is unmerciful." Years would go by without any movement on Heather's case. And then in 2003, another person of interest would emerge. Christopher Below was a native of Henderson, Kentucky, who was living in the area at the time of Heather's abduction. In 2003, Below, now living in Ohio, was questioned by police about molesting his niece. He was also a suspect in the disappearance of his former lover, Catherine Fetzer. Catherine had vanished in 1991, and evidence linked Below to her disappearance and likely to her murder. However, without a body, police were unable to arrest him. Finally, when the allegations that Christopher had molested his niece emerged, Detective Scott Thomas of the Medina, Ohio Police Department saw an opportunity to interrogate Below about Catherine. Below confessed to murdering his former girlfriend in 1991. As Detective Thomas had been digging into Below's history, he'd stumbled upon the disappearance of Heather Teague and started to wonder if Christopher could be involved. Detective Thomas felt confident that Christopher Below had killed women other than Fetzer. He described the man as extremely manipulative and said when you looked into his eyes, you saw nothing but darkness. Not only was Christopher Below in the area when Heather disappeared, he periodically had a scruffy beard and hair, much like the witness across the river described. Within days of Heather's abduction, Christopher abruptly moved out of Kentucky. Chris was later questioned about Heather's disappearance while he was in prison for the murder of Catherine Fetzer. However, he denied any involvement. Another possibility that's been presented in Heather's case is that Marty Dill and Christopher Below potentially knew one another. They were known to frequent the same bar, one that Heather herself occasionally visited. Dill also grew and sold marijuana, which could have been another way the two men were linked. It has been surmised that they may have abducted and murdered Heather together, though again, this is purely speculation. And on a side note, I read in an article that Sarah Teague spoke about two young women who approached her after Heather disappeared, and they claimed to have seen the red and white Bronco leaving the Newburgh area the day Heather disappeared. And they said there was another car driving either right in front or right behind the Bronco. And I think the implication is that Marty Dill was in the Bronco and perhaps Christopher below was in the other vehicle. I only came across this in one article and I did not find anything else that substantiated this. So again, it has been surmised that Christopher and Marty may have abducted and murdered Heather together. And on another podcast, the host stated that Christopher Below left Kentucky on the day that Marty Dill committed suicide. So again, is that a coincidence, or was he fleeing from his involvement in Heather's murder? In 2008, a bloodhound was taken to Marvin Dill's property by Penny Bell, who ran a Milwaukee-based bloodhound tracking organization. The bloodhound, whose name was Nixter, was allowed to smell the bathing suit worn by Heather on the day she vanished. Joshua Dill, Marvin's son, spoke with Sarah Teague about the case. He was only 11 when his father committed suicide. Sarah was not granted permission to search the Dill property. So she, along with Bell, Nixter, and investigators, searched the area that surrounded Marty's property. The bloodhound apparently hit several times in areas leading toward the Dill property, but they were unable to go on the property itself. And again, Joshua, who was Marty's son, and his mother, Marty's widow, were still living at the same property in 2008 when those bloodhounds were taken there. Despite multiple setbacks, Sarah continued to fight. She petitioned the Kentucky State Police and the FBI for files regarding Heather's case. She was repeatedly denied that information. Eventually, she took both organizations to court, and she won, which gave her access to information regarding Heather's disappearance. The files only added to the shroud of mystery surrounding Heather's case. FBI documents didn't match the original reports of what happened. An unnamed FBI agent wrote in a 2005 memo that Heather Teague was last seen on a boat ramp, not on a beach, 2 hours after the key witness had called police. Redacted FBI documents also implied that more than one person may have been involved in Teague's disappearance, and also that she may have been going into a witness protection program based on something involving drugs and public corruption. Quote, presently, attention is primarily being focused on the strong possibility of drug/prostitution strip club public corruption link to Heather Teague's abduction. Investigation continuing. This was a quote written by an FBI agent in 2005. A 2007 FBI synopsis also mentioned something which was redacted in the memo, and it said that something was, quote, being kept a secret by Kentucky State Police. Another unexplained question in Heather's case is why the FBI got involved to begin with. The FBI told Sarah Teague it was because the case was potentially connected to another case the agency was interested in, but they offered no additional information. Sarah also claims that the 911 call that was played for her initially by police in 2008 differed from the 911 call she was given after she won the court case in 2016. I'm not exactly sure how the calls differed, but it seems that Sarah claimed in one of the calls, Tim, the witness across the river, described a bearded man with bushy hair abducting her daughter. And in a different call, he said the man may have had a beard and bushy hair, or he might have been wearing a mosquito net or wig. People speculating about the case have wondered if Tim changed his description of the perpetrator after he was shown a driver's license photo of Marty Dill. And the implication here, perhaps, is that the police wanted to frame Dill for Heather's abduction and thus showed the witness an image of Dill, and the witness then modified his description in order to fit that picture of Dill. The witness, Tim, has disputed this claim and said the composite sketch was drawn before he ever saw an image of Dill. In 2004, Tim said that he was confident that Dill was the man he saw. He said, quote, "If I'm wrong, then I'm sorry for it. But when you see something like I saw and it's instilled in your memory bank, then you don't forget it. That is the individual, and there are certain things that I saw that lead me to believe it was the individual Mr. Dill." However, these inconsistencies that have arisen regarding the 911 calls have cast some suspicion on the witness himself. I won't go too deeply into that here, though if you want to dive into that rabbit hole, there are plenty of forums and other spaces online where you can see more about speculation regarding the witness. My own personal opinion is that I find it highly unlikely that the witness would have been involved in Heather's case. After all, if he hadn't phoned police that day, they might never have known of Heather's abduction at all. She could easily have been later simply considered a young woman who was having a hard time in her life, and she decided to run away. And depending on how long it took to find her car, the things that were left on the beach might have been long gone. There may have been no evidence other than her car that she had ever been there. During the court case, which eventually granted Sarah Teague the rights to Heather's case file, Judge Shepard asked Cody Weber, an attorney for the Kentucky State Police, if there was any explanation for why there were two different 911 calls. Weber said, quote, he had no explanation for the claim, and that Kentucky State Police has maintained that there is only one 911 call. After Judge Shepard ruled in favor of Sarah Teague, he ordered Kentucky State Police to release, among other evidence, the 911 call or calls, the names of troopers who had handled the evidence over the years, the names of troopers present when Teague and her attorney listened to the 911 calls in 2008 and 2016, and any mugshots of Dill. One thing is certain in the case of Heather Teague. The mystery surrounding her abduction has led to a plethora of conspiracy theories about what happened to her that day, and widespread speculation that law enforcement has covered up evidence in the case. The loss of her daughter forever altered Sarah Teague's life, and to this day, she continues to fight for justice for her eldest child. After reviewing the articles I found about the case, I tended toward the conclusion that law enforcement seemed to believe from the very beginning, and that was that Marvin Dill was the likely kidnapper and murderer of Heather Teague. He took his story to the grave when he committed suicide, but that act in itself is quite telling. Some have speculated that Dill killed himself due to the marijuana that he was growing on his property and the fact that he would be going back to prison when police arrived at his house and found said marijuana. This may be true, but it's not an easy answer for me, especially since he barely served time for his previous marijuana conviction. Premeditated murder, on the other hand, would have put him behind bars for life, not to mention how that information would have affected his wife, his son, and other family members. Maybe he didn't want to be around to face it all. There's a lot more information about Heather Teague's disappearance online, some of which I will add to the show notes. The guys at True Crime Garage also did a really great in-depth look at Heather's case, which included 2 episodes, and I'll add that to the show notes as well. In those 2 episodes, you can hear more about the other potential suspect, Christopher Below, as well as more of the legal aspects between Sarah Teague and law enforcement. In August of 2019, Heather's family and friends held a memorial at Victory Church in Madisonville, Kentucky, to remember the 23-year-old. In an article, Sarah said, quote, "I know that I was chosen. She was chosen, and our story is going to make a huge impact on people's lives." Sarah continues to believe that someday, hopefully soon, she will know what became of her daughter. I'm going to end the episode today with a letter to the editor written by Sarah Teague that was published in the McLean County News on November 2nd, 1995. Dear editor, 2 months and 4 days have passed since August 26th, a day that changed many lives. Does anyone still remember that day? That day, Heather Danielle Teague was abducted from Newburgh Beach. Where is my little girl? Who else knows why and where? Nothing shines without her here anymore. Sunny days are cold and dreary without her presence near. All she wanted to do was to get away for a few days to be alone. We had planned to see her on Sunday. We never got that tomorrow. In 23 years, she touched so many lives with her smile, her caring, her patience, her way of sensing a need in one glance and giving was what Heather was about. We need Heather home where she belongs. She never meant to be gone this long. It's getting cold now. I really need to know where my little girl is. Heather loved the sun, its warmth. She loved the moon and found its glory. In the stars there was magic. Her inside beauty and her love of nature is the spirit of Heather. Wherever she is, her loving, precious, one-of-a-kind spirit will always shine. Please bring Heather home before it gets any colder. The sun has already lost its warmth, and the leaves are turning now. I used to see the beauty, understand the magic, but that's difficult for this mother right now. The snowflakes will be falling soon. Please let her be home before then. We have a celebration all planned as soon as she gets home. In her memory, if she isn't alive anymore, we will play Dylan, The Doors. I know she would hate all this attention, but for some reason, we were chosen to be right here. Someday it will all be worth it, and perhaps we will understand why you had to go and where you have been. Where is my Heather? I miss her so very much. The anguish and fear we have felt since August 26th is leaving us drained from hoping with each passing day she will be brought home, and she has not. I cannot stop begging someone to just please let me know where she is. I won't stop looking. I won't stop asking or passing out her pictures. I gave birth to her. God blessed me with an angel. I cannot give up the search, and there will be a day soon when she will be found. I wonder as I write this, will I be ready to know the truth? Will I ever be able to understand? Will nature ever regain its beauty? I dream she calls and says, "Mama, come and get me." I wake up and call hospitals. I wonder if they have cut her hair. I wonder if she has been drugged and traumatized and might not know her name. My spirit, my life is draining from me every day. She is my firstborn. I nursed her and taught her to love and trust. I saved her footprints when she was growing up, are the last footprints I get to remember left on Newburgh Beach in the mud. I refuse to believe that. Whoever is responsible for her being gone will pay somehow, someday. God will see to that. You see, the devil with an evil, sad, sad past took her. God protects his angels, so I know she is either with him or he is watching over her. Today would be a good day to bring my Heather home. Don't you think so? Because the letter to the editor is quite long, I have compressed it slightly. However, I will also put a link in the show notes to that newspaper article. So I think we will leave it at that. And if you have any information regarding Heather Teague's disappearance, please contact the Kentucky State Police at 270-826-3312. I also have a phone number that is listed on the Charlie Project as Heather's mother, Sarah, and that phone number is 270-824-8343. That is the end of this very heartbreaking episode on Heather Teague. And for the sake of Heather's mother, Sarah, and for all of those that knew and loved her, hopefully someday the answer to what happened to Heather will be known.
If you have any comments or case suggestions, please send me an email at bitterendingspodcast@gmail.com. You can also find out all of the resources for this episode and read the show notes and more. Visit my website at www.bitterendingspod.com. You can also find me on Facebook at Bitter Endings Podcast. The Bitter Endings Podcast is sponsored by my fiction novels. The Northern Michigan Asylum series are novels that braid elements of haunting and murder mystery, and they're all inspired by a real former asylum here in Traverse City, Michigan, which is where I live. You can find the novels on Amazon.com in audio format if you are an Audible listener, as well as in ebook and paperback. If you enjoyed today's episode of Bitter Endings and you would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to this podcast and also leaving a review. Thanks so much and have an amazing and a safe day. I just want to take a quick minute to also acknowledge the music played in the Bitter Endings podcast. This song is called Disease Tree by Noya Sakamata.